The old house stood on a slight rise, overlooking the valley like a sentinel guarding a dark secret. The Waller family, Ray, Eve, Izzy, and Elliot, were drawn to it, seduced by the promise of a fresh start and the allure of its centerpiece, a shimmering swimming pool nestled in the backyard. Ray, a former baseball player recently retired due to the debilitating effects of multiple sclerosis, saw the pool as a therapeutic oasis. Eve, ever pragmatic, envisioned a permanent home, a sanctuary for her family. The children, Izzy and Elliot, were simply excited about the prospect of endless summer days spent splashing and playing. But beneath the surface of idyllic suburban life, a malevolent force stirred, awakened by the Waller family's arrival. The pool, fed by an ancient underground spring, was not merely a source of recreation. It was a conduit to a dark, pagan entity that demanded a sacrifice for its life-giving gifts. The house seemed to sigh as the moving truck pulled away, leaving the Waller family alone in their new abode. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and chlorine, a strange combination that prickled Eve's senses. Ray, despite his physical limitations, was eager to explore the pool. He envisioned himself regaining his strength, the cool water soothing his aching muscles and calming his frayed nerves. "It's perfect, Eve," he said, his eyes gleaming with hope. "Just what I need to get back on my feet." Eve managed a weak smile. "Just be careful, Ray. Don't overdo it." Izzy, a teenager teetering on the edge of adulthood, was less enthusiastic. She saw the house as another temporary stop, another chapter in her family's nomadic existence. Elliot, the youngest, was easily excitable, his imagination running wild with possibilities. He raced towards the pool, his laughter echoing through the empty yard. "Can we swim now, Dad? Can we?" Ray chuckled. "Not yet, buddy. We need to clean it up first." The pool was murky, filled with fallen leaves and debris. As Ray began to clear the surface, he felt a strange pull, an almost hypnotic sensation drawing him closer to the water. He dismissed it as fatigue, the lingering effects of his illness. But as he reached into the depths, a sharp pain shot through his hand. He pulled back, his fingers bleeding from a deep scratch. "Damn it," he exclaimed, examining the wound. What the hell was that? Eve rushed over, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay, Ray? Let me see." The scratch was deep, unusually so. It looked as if it had been made by something sharp and unnatural. Eve cleaned the wound, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. "Maybe we should call someone to take a look at the pool," she suggested. "Make sure everything's safe." Ray waved her concerns away. "It's probably just some sharp edge. I'll be fine." But as he stared into the water, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from below. The pool maintenance crew arrived the next day, two burly men with weathered faces and knowing eyes. They examined the pool, their expressions growing increasingly grim. "This is some setup you got here," the older of the two said, scratching his chin. "Self-sustaining, they say. Takes its water from an underground spring." Ray frowned. "Is that a problem?" The man shrugged. "Depends on what you believe. Some folks say these springs have a mind of their own, that they can influence things." Ray scoffed. "You don't believe in that stuff, do you?" The man's eyes flickered towards the pool. "I've seen things, mister, things you wouldn't believe." As the days passed, Ray began his therapy, spending hours in the pool. The water seemed to soothe his aching muscles, easing the stiffness and pain that had plagued him for so long. He felt stronger, more alive than he had in years. His illness, the MS, seemed to recede, its grip loosening with each passing day. Eve watched him with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She was grateful for his improvement, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He was spending more and more time in the pool, his eyes glazed over, his movements almost robotic. He seemed different. "Ray, are you okay?" she asked one evening as he emerged from the pool, his skin pale and slick. "You seem distant." Ray smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Eve. Never been better. The pool is working wonders." But Eve wasn't convinced. She saw a darkness lurking beneath his surface, a subtle shift in his personality that sent shivers down her spine. Meanwhile, the children were experiencing their own unsettling encounters. Izzy, drawn to the pool by an inexplicable curiosity, felt a constant sense of being watched. Shadows flickered at the edge of her vision, and she swore she could hear whispers carried on the wind. Elliot, usually fearless, became afraid to go near the water. He claimed that something had grabbed him while he was swimming, pulling him under the surface. He couldn't explain what it was, only that it was cold and slimy and filled with malice. One afternoon, the family cat, a fluffy Persian named Snowball, disappeared. They searched everywhere, but Snowball was nowhere to be found. Elliot was convinced that the pool had taken him. "It's the monster, Mommy," he cried, his face streaked with tears. The monster in the pool got Snowball. Eve tried to reassure him, but a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. The Wallers decided to throw a pool party, hoping to integrate themselves into the neighborhood and dispel the growing sense of unease. The sun was shining, the music was playing, and the laughter of children filled the air. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a dark current swirled. Kay, the realtor who had sold them the house, arrived, her smile a little too wide, her eyes a little too bright. She made a beeline for Eve, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I hope you're enjoying the house," she said. "It's got a lot of history, you know." Eve frowned. "What do you mean?" Kay hesitated, her gaze flickering towards the pool. "Well, there was an incident years ago. The previous owners, the Summers family, their daughter, Rebecca, drowned in the pool." Eve's blood ran cold. "Drowned? Why didn't you tell us?" Kay shrugged. "It was a long time ago, and it didn't seem relevant. Accidents happen, right?" But Eve knew that it was more than just an accident. She could feel it in her bones. As the party continued, Ray's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He was agitated, restless, his eyes darting around as if he were searching for something. He kept staring at the children, a strange hunger in his gaze. Suddenly, he grabbed one of the children, a young boy named Billy, and plunged him into the pool. The boy screamed, thrashing wildly as Ray held him under the surface. Eve shrieked, rushing towards the pool. "Ray, what are you doing?" She pulled Billy from Ray's grasp, the boy gasping for air, his face pale with terror. Ray stared at them, his eyes wide with confusion. "I don't know what happened," he stammered. "It was like I wasn't myself." The party guests stared in shock, their laughter replaced by horrified silence. Eve quickly ushered everyone out, her face burning with shame and fear. That night, as Ray slept fitfully, Eve did some research. She scoured the internet, searching for any information about the house, the Summers family, anything that could explain the strange events that had been plaguing them. She found a local news article about Rebecca Summers drowning. It was a brief, almost dismissive piece, attributing the death to a tragic accident. But something about the article didn't sit right with Eve. She dug deeper, searching through old newspaper archives and historical records. She discovered a series of disappearances in the area, dating back centuries. People vanishing without a trace, their fates shrouded in mystery. And then she found it, a reference to an ancient pagan healing spring, a place of sacred power guarded by a malevolent entity. The spring was said to have the ability to cure any ailment, but it demanded a sacrifice in return. The truth hit Eve like a tidal wave. The pool was not just a pool, it was a gateway to something ancient and evil. Ray's healing was not a miracle, it was a curse. And the entity was not content with just one sacrifice. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Eve tracked down Lucy Summers, Rebecca's mother. Lucy was a broken woman, haunted by the ghost of her daughter, her eyes filled with a bottomless grief. "I tried to warn them," she sobbed, her voice hoarse with despair. "I told them not to buy the house, but they wouldn't listen." Eve gripped Lucy's hand, her heart pounding in her chest. "Tell me everything," she pleaded. "What happened to Rebecca?" Lucy closed her eyes, reliving the nightmare that had consumed her life. "Tommy, my son, was dying," she began, her voice trembling. "He had a rare form of cancer, and the doctors said there was nothing they could do. Then, one day, I heard about the spring. People said it had healing powers, that it could cure anything. I was desperate, Eve. I would have done anything to save my son. I went to the spring, and I prayed. I begged the entity to heal Tommy, and it answered. It told me that it would heal him, but only if I offered it a sacrifice. Eve gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? Lucy's voice broke. It wanted a life for a life. It wanted me to sacrifice Rebecca. Eve recoiled in horror. You didn't. You couldn't have. Lucy wept uncontrollably. I tried to resist. I tried to find another way. But Tommy was dying, Eve. He was slipping away. And the entity was relentless. It whispered in my ear, night and day, promising me that it would all be worth it. Finally, I broke. I led Rebecca to the pool one night, under the guise of getting Tommy's toy boat. She went to get it, but something pulled her under. I watched her drown. Eve stared at Lucy, her mind reeling. And Tommy, was he healed? Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. He lived. He's healthy now. But I lost my daughter, Eve. I sold my soul. The entity is still there, Eve. It's always there, waiting for its next victim. You have to get your family out of that house. You have to save them. Eve raced back to the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She found Ray in the backyard, standing by the pool, his eyes vacant, his body swaying gently, as if he were being controlled by an outside force. Ray? She called out, her voice trembling. Ray, can you hear me? Ray turned to her, his eyes devoid of recognition. The water calls Eve, he said, his voice a hollow monotone. It wants what it is owed. Eve realized that the entity had taken complete control of Ray. He was no longer her husband. He was a puppet, a vessel for the ancient evil. Where are the children? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. Ray smiled, a chilling, unnatural smile. They are where they belong, with the water. Eve ran inside, searching for Izzy and Elliot. She found Elliot by the pool, his eyes wide with terror, his body frozen in place. The entity had him trapped, suspended between life and death. Mommy, he cried, his voice a strangled whisper. Help me. Eve reached for him, but Ray blocked her path. He is ours now, Eve, he said, his voice dripping with malice. He will join Rebecca in the deep. Eve lunged at Ray, desperation fueling her every move. She pushed him away from Elliot, giving herself a chance to pull her son to safety. But as she reached for Elliot, the water erupted, tendrils of dark energy snaking out and pulling him beneath the surface. Elliot, Eve screamed, diving into the pool after him. The water was cold and dark, a suffocating abyss that threatened to swallow her whole. Eve struggled to swim, her limbs heavy, her lungs burning. She could see Elliot below her, his eyes wide with terror, his body being dragged deeper and deeper. She reached for him, her fingers brushing against his outstretched hand. But just as she was about to grab him, something slammed into her, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked up and saw Ray, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. He was being controlled by the entity, his face twisted into a mask of hatred. You cannot save him, Eve, he hissed. He is ours now. Join him in the depths. Ray lunged at her, his hands reaching for her throat. Eve fought back with all her strength, kicking and clawing at him. But he was too strong, his movements fueled by the entity's power. Meanwhile, Izzy, who had been hiding in the house, heard her mother's screams. She knew that she had to do something, anything, to save her family. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her about the house, about the ancient spring and the malevolent entity that guarded it. She remembered her grandmother telling her that the only way to defeat the entity was to strike at its source, to sever its connection to the water. Izzy grabbed her father's old baseball bat, the one he had used during his glory days. It was heavy, unwieldy, but she held it with determination. She ran towards the pool, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw her mother struggling with her father in the water. She saw Elliot sinking beneath the surface. She knew that she had to act fast. With a primal scream, Izzy charged at the pool, swinging the baseball bat with all her might. She didn't know what she was aiming for. She just knew that she had to break the entity's hold on her family. The bat connected with something solid, sending a shockwave through her arms. The water around her began to churn, the darkness receding, replaced by a faint, ethereal light. Ray gasped, his eyes clearing, his body slumping in the water. The entity's control over him had been broken. Eve seized the opportunity, grabbing Elliot and pulling him towards the surface. But Elliot was unconscious, his body limp and lifeless. Eve struggled to reach the surface, her lungs burning, her arms aching. She could feel Rebecca's spirit guiding her, helping her to navigate the murky depths. Finally, she broke through the surface, gasping for air, her eyes scanning the yard. She saw Izzy standing by the pool, her face pale, her body trembling. She saw Ray, lying motionless in the water. "Izzy, help me!" she cried, dragging Elliot towards the edge of the pool. Izzy rushed over, helping her mother to pull Elliot from the water. They laid him on the ground, his skin cold and clammy. "He's not breathing," Eve said, her voice choked with fear. She began CPR, pressing on his chest, breathing into his mouth. But Elliot remained unresponsive. Ray, who had regained consciousness, watched them with a look of anguish on his face. He knew what he had to do. "It's not over," he said, his voice weak but resolute. "The entity is still here. It will keep coming back until it gets what it wants. There's only one way to stop it. I have to give it what it wants." Eve stared at him, her eyes wide with horror. "No, Ray, don't do it." But Ray had already made up his mind. He stood up, his body swaying, his eyes fixed on the pool. "I love you, Eve," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "Take care of the kids." He turned and walked towards the pool, his movements slow but deliberate. He stepped into the water, his body disappearing beneath the surface. The water churned, the darkness rising, engulfing the pool in a vortex of evil. Then, silence. The entity was gone, appeased by Ray's sacrifice. The sun rose the next morning, casting a golden light over the valley. Eve, Izzy, and Elliot stood by the pool, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. The pool was still, silent, its surface reflecting the clear blue sky. The entity was gone, but its presence lingered, a dark stain on their lives. "We can't stay here," Izzy said, her voice trembling. "This place is cursed." Eve shook her head. "No, Izzy, we're not going to let it win. We're going to stay here, and we're going to make sure that this never happens again." They made arrangements to have the pool filled in, to bury the gateway to the ancient evil forever. They planted flowers over the spot where the pool had been, a symbol of hope and renewal. They stayed in the house, not because they loved it, but because they felt a responsibility to protect others from the entity's grasp. They became the guardians of the spring, the protectors of the valley. They never forgot Ray's sacrifice, his bravery, his love. They honored his memory by living their lives to the fullest, by cherishing every moment, by fighting against the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. And as the years passed, the house on the hill became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of love and sacrifice, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can still bloom. But they never forgot the pool or the entity, and they always watched the water, always vigilant, always ready to defend their home from the drowning curse.